Unless you were a child in 1918, this is the first real pandemic to hit us, right? I say real because there are HIV/AIDS, SARS, MERS, and Ebola viruses that were somehow or sort of pandemic, but their impact has not been on a grand a scale as COVID-19. So when this pandemic hit us, what did you feel? How did you react? And how is your disposition today? Let me try to pose it a guess. 1. Fear. Fear of contamination, of death for our loved ones, fear for their well-being, or loss of income. Even those who have businesses or are professionals, they are as hard hit as anybody else as the economy and the world screeches to a sudden stop. Second is hopelessness. Well, many people think that there is no end to this. What if this was a biological weapon that was accidentally released from a laboratory? If so, there are news that are coming out that because of this, there can be no human cure or vaccine. Some even think that God is punishing us because we have neglected Him too long, that our morality has sunk to its lowest. Divorce, abortion, same-sex marriage, euthanasia, artificial contraceptives, that God's wrath is a punishment through this pandemic. The violent and unprecedented strong typhoons, the simultaneous volcanic eruptions, the successive pandemics of recent decades. Is this the end of the world? Nobody knows, brothers and sisters. My suggestion to all of you watching today is, don't just drop, but drink your F.R.A.P. If you are a coffee drinker and you frequent cafes or Starbucks, you either order plain hot or cold black coffee, or in Starbucks case, Frappuccino. And Frappuccino comes in two main variations or variants. The coffee F.R.A.P, which combines coffee, milk, sugar, flavored syrup, and whipped cream, and the F.R.A.P, which adds ice cream to it. So let me use the acronym F.R.A.P. F.R.A.P. And let's start with the letter F. Faith over fear. Many of our fears are imagined and not really real. That's why the acronym FEAR is used to represent false expectations appearing real. There is this story of a group of tourists, and they were stranded somewhere in the countryside because of the lockdown, and were given old rations to eat. Before eating the food, they tested it by throwing some of it to a dog that seemed to enjoy it and suffered no after effects. The following day, they learned that the dog had died. Everyone was panic-stricken. Many began to vomit and complained of fever and severe diarrhea. A doctor was called in to treat the victims for food poisoning. The doctor began by asking what had happened to the body of the dog. Well, inquiries were made, and a neighbor said it casually. She said, "Oh, it was thrown in a ditch because it was run over by a car." FEAR may well represent forget everything and run. When we let hopelessness reign in our hearts, FEAR becomes future events already ruined. Pope Francis, in his encyclical Lumen Fidei, says that faith is not a light that dispels all of our darkness, but rather a lamp that guides our steps in the night, and that is sufficient. As we continue to obey our authorities and stay quarantined for our own sake, we must rely on our faith to guide us. There is no clear solution in sight. The vaccine or cure is months or even years ahead. The World Health Organization has just declared that we may have to live with this virus for the rest of our lives in much the same way that influenza, which struck the world in 1918 in the form of what we now call the Spanish flu, went on for a couple more years, infected 500 million people, a third of the population then, and killed 50 million plus. The light at the end of the tunnel remains tiny and fleeting, but we must continue to hope in the Lord. If the Spanish flu and all the other pandemics before this one went away, therefore this too shall pass. It is through the eyes of faith that we are able to see God's faithfulness to us. People are in need of faith during times of hardship and refinement. Doubts may set in, for such is human. But when our prayers are not answered, when a loved one dies, when our jobs suddenly disappear, and when tragedy strikes, our tendency is to doubt God. But doubting, brothers and sisters, is not altogether a sin. In fact, skepticism should lead us to learn more about Him, to listen more intently to Him, and to search more for Him. It can also lead us to rely on God in His mercy and His grace. In Jude chapter 1, it says, "Have mercy on those who doubt." And in 2 Corinthians, these words that resonated with Paul also resonate with us. "My grace is sufficient, for my power is made perfect in weakness." A good number of our saints grappled with God's existence. They doubted God in so many ways. Saint Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, who died in 1968, described his spiritual sufferings in a letter to a fellow priest. "Blasphemies cross my mind incessantly, and even more so false ideas of infidelity and unbelief. I believe my soul transfixed at every instant of my life. It kills me. My faith is upheld only by a constant effort of my will against every kind of human persuasion. My faith is only the fruit of the continual effort that I exact of myself. And all of this, Father, is not something that happens a few times a day, but it is continuous." Our relationships matter. We need one another now more than at any time in our lives. When we are all marooned in our own homes, family becomes more important and friendships are cherished, even just in cyberspace for the time being. There is this story of 3 men who were marooned in an island. Suddenly, a genie appeared and said, "I will grant you one wish only each. What would you want to have?" So the first man said, "I miss my family in the Philippines." Whoosh! And he was gone. The second man said, "I miss my CFC community in Australia." Whoosh! And he was gone too. And the third man said, "I'm lonely. I wish my friends were back here." For the longest time, people thought that happiness was the product or end result of having money. That's why people worked so hard to enrich themselves, because they believed that money can buy happiness and maybe long life. But let's watch this video of the findings of Harvard University.
What do you think are most people's ultimate goals in life? Surveys of millennials show that they're mostly interested in getting rich and famous. A 2017 survey reported that 1 in 12 millennials would detach themselves from their families for fame. So is fame, wealth, and achievement the key to happiness in life? It's always been a mystery how people's goals play out. Until now. The Harvard study of adult development is the longest ever ongoing study of happiness and health. Researchers started following 724 men for 80 years from when they were teenagers in the 1930s until today. About 60 or so of those original men are still alive today and well into their 90s. The study is still ongoing and has extended to about 2,000 of the original men's offspring. Their work, home life, and relationships were all extensively studied in those 75 plus years. This kind of study is extremely rare because usually funding runs out, or researchers lose interest or just pass away. So in 1938, the study started with researchers selecting 2 groups of teenagers. The first group, I guess you can say, had more advantages starting out. They were from more affluent families and were sophomores at Harvard College. The second group was made up of very disadvantaged boys from the poorest families in Boston. They were living in slums, often with no running water. Which group do you think ended up more happy and healthy later in life? All the boys became adults and entered the workforce. Some climbed the social ladder from the very bottom to the very top, and some fell in the complete opposite direction. They were businessmen, doctors, and lawyers. One of the participants later became president of the United States. Some others developed alcoholism, and a few developed schizophrenia. The researchers didn't just give questionnaires. They scanned the participants' brains, drew their blood, talked to their children, and videotaped them talking to their spouses. After tens of thousands of pages of information, what do you think was the lesson about being happier and healthier? Was it to get more wealth, fame, and accomplishments? Actually, it was none of those. The bottom line is this: warm relationships keep us happier and healthier. Period. There were 3 main conclusions from this. First, people more socially connected to family, friends, and community are happier, physically healthier, and they live longer than people who are less connected. People who are lonely saw their health decline earlier in midlife, their brain functions declined sooner, and they lived shorter lives. So conclusion number 1 is, social connections are very good for us, and loneliness kills. It was also found that living with a lot of conflict is very bad for your health. Marriages with lots of arguments and little affection were worse for health than getting a divorce. People in warm relationships seem to have some kind of protective shield. The participants in their 80s felt less physical pain if they were in happy partnerships. But those who were in unhappy partnerships felt magnified physical pain. This link was so clear that the researchers could actually predict whether someone would be healthy and happy by age 80 just by seeing how satisfied they were in their relationships at age 50. So conclusion number 2 is, it's not about the number of friends you have. It's not about whether or not you're in a committed relationship. It's the quality of your close relationships that matters the most. Lastly, the participants in secure relationships in their 80s had sharper and longer lasting memories. Those who didn't feel they could count on someone had earlier memory loss. And it wasn't that the happy couples never fought. They could actually argue day after day, but as long as they felt they could count on this other person when they needed help, their memories weren't affected. So conclusion number 3 is, good relationships protect our brains. The problem is that there's an epidemic of loneliness in the US nowadays. A February 2019 study in Psychology Today reported that 47% of American adults are lonely. This is double the number from decades ago. Before you panic about being in that 47% of lonely Americans, there are actions we can all start taking today to better our relationships. 1. The next time you're at dinner with someone, start a no-phone policy. No phones are allowed on the table, and as soon as someone tries to break the rule, say, "You seem busy, let's reschedule." 2. Try to listen more and prescribe less. Everyone has had different life experiences that have shaped their views. It's really easy to assume we are the right ones in everything every time. Sometimes being a friend is just listening and not telling people what they should or need to do. That brings me to 3. Allow other people to have completely different opinions without writing them off your social circle. If we all thought alike, how dangerous would our world be? 4. Volunteer for a cause and get more in touch with your community. 5. Let go of long-held grudges. They're really bad for you.
A. Appropriate mindset is a must. We want things to remain as is. We do not want to alter what has been working. We are scared of change. Why? Because maybe change may just be around the corner. Death, we dread it. Sometimes we thank our lucky stars why we are still here, while many of our classmates and friends have already left. Or maybe our fear level notches up a bit higher because we anticipate that we are next. Because we are creatures of habit, change is our greatest enemy. For those in their 50s and above, our bodies are not as lithe and athletic as before. We now walk more slowly and for some, in a cadence that resembles a funeral march. Forgive the humor. Our joints and muscles are not as flexible as before. We can't lift heavy objects anymore. We cannot bend as much. And we have a difficult time remembering names, numbers, places, and faces. For many of us who were young ones, we don't want to buy new cell phones anymore or computers. We don't want to even learn how to use them anymore. They get to become more complicated as new models come in. We are satisfied with our simple talk and text, and maybe a little bit of Viber and Facebook on the side. We must remember that we are on the last leg of our journey to reach the gates of eternity. We are now in our departure terminal.
I am now about to begin the last of my days. I'm within what others would call a terminal phase. I myself can only say it's living dead. Right into the office with a song in my head that goes la da 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 da, and you know it grows la da 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 da. Oh, la da 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 da. Oh, la da 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 da.
If I may try to take a different spin on the song, we are either there already or approaching the departure terminal. The word office in the song represents our day-to-day lives, the chores that we do, the passions we have in our retirement age, the things that we do to keep us busy. But at some point, all these won't matter anymore. So brothers and sisters, even if we want to remain immortal, we must realize and accept it sooner or later that this cannot happen. Or maybe, just maybe, that an elixir of youth will be discovered, but that would be beyond our lifetime. Let's just say we will have to confront death eventually by accepting that we are just in the terminal of life waiting for our turn. We can live more peacefully and joyfully. And perhaps we can begin to answer this question: where is God in the midst of this pandemic? Brothers and sisters, God is in our hearts. He is in the hearts of all those who are risking their lives to treat the COVID-19 patients. He is also in the hearts of all those who are in the front lines, marketing, selling, delivering. He is in the hearts of those who have volunteered their time, talent, and resources to lift up the spirits of the frontliners. He is in the hearts of those who choose to matter in this pandemic. If we can just change our paradigms from just looking inward to one of looking outward, that is, to become more generous with our time, talent, and treasure to help others, we will truly discover that life, or whatever is left of it, is worth living. Our problems will surely go away if our focus is to help others. Instead of us becoming benefactors, we become beneficiaries as the glow of joy from helping envelopes us and makes us feel like we are in the front lines to accept the joy that our Lord offers us. Letter P. Prayer is the key to survival. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." This profound statement may pertain to the many distractions that have filled our lives pre-pandemic. Perhaps busyness has taken away this precious time for us to commune with our God. He wants to remind us that in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 14, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sins and heal their land." As we pray and contemplate on this passage, we are led to 4 important takeaways. First, the phrase, humble themselves. Do we make an effort to be humble? God tells us how much blessings He will give us if we remain humble. He also tells us the consequences of pride. In Proverbs chapter 11 verse 2, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." In James chapter 4 verse 12, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up." Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta has practical examples for us to learn from. She said, "These are the few ways we can practice humility: to speak as little as possible of oneself, to mind one's own business, not to want to manage other people's affairs, to avoid curiosity, to accept contradictions and correction cheerfully, to pass over the mistakes of others, to accept insults and injuries, to accept being slighted, forgotten, and disliked, never to stand on one's dignity, to choose always the hardest." Let us take a deeper look at each example and see if we pass or fail. First, to be humble is to speak as little as possible of oneself. We think we know better. We impose on other people our preferences. We want to control everything. When our ideas are not welcomed, we sulk or even get angry. Pass or fail? Second, to be humble is to mind one's own business, not to want to manage other people's affairs. We gossip, we demean or put down people, we are busybodies, we spread fake news. Pass or fail? Third, to be humble is to accept contradictions and correction cheerfully. We do not welcome brotherly correction. We do not like people who call our attention for our mistakes or for our errors. Pass or fail? Fourth, to be humble is to pass over the mistakes of others, to accept insults and injuries, to accept being slighted, forgotten, and disliked, to be kind and gentle even under provocation. Well, we do not forgive easily or do not forgive at all. We harbor ill feelings towards others. We resent people. Instead of forgiving, we retaliate. We get even. We spend our energy plotting our own revenge. How do we do so? Well, from a simple unfriending on Facebook to slandering and character assassination through others or through social media. Pass or fail? To be humble is to never stand on one's dignity. We use our success, our talent, our wealth, and our good works to show other people that we are better than them. Sometimes we do not respect nor obey our leaders because we think we are better than them. When we pray, we can be good at asking God for things, but we forget to listen to Him. In my own prayer time, I may ask God for a ton of favors, but at the end of my prayers, I always say, "Lord, if it is not the best, then grant me what is best according to your will. And also grant me the grace to accept your will for me, to always be grateful and joyful in all circumstances." So brothers and sisters, to review, F, faith over fear. R, relationships matter. A, appropriate mindset is a must. And P, prayer is the key to survival. Surviving this pandemic is finding God in its midst. We learned today that God has never been absent. He has been present all along, and He weeps with us. God desires only what is good for us. He never desires evil for us, but He allows evil to happen to us for us to realize and understand that our transformation and our life depends on Him. We must also remember that God gave us His choicest gift of free will for us to have the ability to choose to follow His path or the other path. If there was no free will, there is no point to creating us. We will only become puppets without limbs and intelligence. But by giving us free will, He allows us to discover for ourselves the glory of heaven here on earth. But because of free will, we may stray from the path He wants us to follow. Nonetheless, nothing is hopeless. He is just on the sidelines waiting for us to call upon Him. And He responds, but perhaps not in the way we expect or not in the time frame we want, but He answers all our prayers in the manner that will be good for us and those around us in the end. It may take some time to discover the reasons why He allows things to happen that are not in the realm of a perfect world, but in the end, all things work for the good of those who love God, especially those who are called according to His purpose and respond to Him in faith. Let us all drink our F.R.A.P to that. God bless your families, brothers and sisters. God bless couples for Christ.